Welcome to the Melinda Eitzen Show. I'm Melinda. We are so lucky today to have with us my newest and youngest lawyer at Duffee Eitzen, Neali Lambert.
Hi, Melinda. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here.
I know, me too. What a long-awaited journey this has been.
So for our audience, we have 9 lawyers at Duffee Eitzen, and we range in age and experience, and you're the youngest.
I am. I'm the youngest.
When were you licensed?
I was licensed in October of 2023.
So a year. Almost a year.
Almost a year. We're coming up on a year. It feels crazy to say that.
But we feel like we've been together longer because we have, because you clerked for us in law school.
That's true. I got the opportunity to come clerk for y'all my first year, and after that I said, you can't make me leave. I'm coming back. So
You've been a great addition.
I'm so happy to be here and be attorney for such an amazing firm. So I'm glad to be here to talk to you today.
Yes. So because of your youth and your newness to being a lawyer, you're in a unique position to kind of see things and remember what people thought about divorce and family law. Lay people, non-lawyers, what
Yes.
did they think about it compared to the reality? Mm-hmm. And you've spent the last year plus your clerking time kind of going, oh, it's really... It's really not like that. And there's probably some misconceptions out there because of TV and film, right?
There's a lot of misconceptions because of TV and film, and you're right that I being newer to the practice have watched people realize the same realizations I had from TV and film that were like, oh, that's not really how it goes.
So give us an example.
Well, when you asked me to do this, the first one that came into my mind was actually the kind of consequences or penance that come from cheating on someone or committing adultery. Mm-hmm. I remember when I first started clerking for you and also in law school when I had that realization. A lot of people think that, well, I'm going to go to mediation, but if I don't get what I want, I'm just going to tell the judge he cheated on me, and then I'll get a lot more money in our divorce settlement. But sadly, that's not the case. A lot of, actually in family law, it is a factor that's considered, but not one that's heavily weighed one way or the other. It's not dispositive, so it won't change the outcome of what's going to happen, and that's really hard for a lot of people to realize.
Yes, they really think, aha.
Yeah.
And they are so personally betrayed that you can see why they feel that way, is there should be, in their minds, a big violation or a big consequence, as you said, for that action, because the person did, break the vows and betray them. But I think one reason that there's not a big penalty for it is I think judges realize that it's more complicated than that. A marriage doesn't fail because of one person's actions. And usually people in a happy marriage don't commit adultery. And I'm not saying adultery is good. I am not saying adultery is good. I'm against it, personally. But I think judges understand that marriages don't fail because of one person's actions. It could be maybe more heavily weighed to one person. And I'm excluding in my statements violence, right?
Oh, and that's one of the other things that would act like people that are in a situation like that where they've been cheated on, but they're excluding violence. That if there was violence, that's something that's definitely considered much more heavily in a situation when someone's a bad actor. But I remember when that happened in a mediation that it was your job as the mediator, and I watched you tell the client, I'm sorry, but that's just not the case, because you have to tell them they think the difference between mediation and trial is that they can go to trial and point out their adultery and that it will change everything. But as a mediator, you had to tell them that sadly, that's not the case when you go to trial. That actually you can probably get and agree to more things than you would be able to in mediation than you would be able to before the judge.
Yay, mediation.
Yay, mediation.
So another, I think, misunderstanding, and I had somebody ask me in an elevator this week, how long do I have to be married to be how long do I have to live together to be common law married?
I agree that there's a lot of people, also had a friend ask me the other day, I feel like since I've become a family law attorney, they're like, are we common law married? Like, can you tell me? And actually in Texas, there's 3 things that have to exist all at the same time in order for you to even say we're common law married. And that's that you and the person agree to be married, you live together in Texas as spouses, and that you represent to everybody else that you are married and you are spouses. And that can come in all different sorts of forms, telling people, even proving it up by you maybe filed on your tax return, calling somebody your husband or your wife, or on a deed. So there's not like a set amount of time. It's just the things that you can do to prove we were common law married.
I know, I told the man in the elevator one day.
Exactly. There's no set amount
He was
of time.
like, what? But it's more than the living together, right?
Yes.
It's those other factors. And really, with those factors, the legal holding out, what I think of as legal holding out, like filing your tax return, because it's fraud to say you're married if you're not. So to me, that's legal holding out. Or adding someone to health insurance, that's a common one. Because they're trying to get the benefits of being married. So it's fraud if you try to get those benefits, so you're not really. That carries more weight than socially saying,
He's my husband.
right,
She's my wife.
or allowing someone else to assume it.
Exactly.
Right? They'll say, oh, your husband, blah, blah, blah. You don't correct them. That could be holding out. But that alone, that's not going to make you common law married.
Right. If you just tell your your family or your neighbors we're married, we're spouses, or we're husband and wife, that's not going to be enough really in the eyes of the court. But it's those other things where you write it down on some document of significance, saying, calling them a husband or calling them a wife. That's what will prove it up in court.
Yes. But if I were counseling someone who did not want to be married,
Don't do that.
don't even introduce them. Don't let anybody correct people if they say, your wife, oh no, that's not my wife.
True, because they will get every one of those people to come out later and say, they called me their wife, you were there. Like,
Right.
So-
You can't create your own holding out either, right?
True.
Like, both people have to be participating in the holding out. You can't run around and tell everybody, this is my husband, and create a husband.
Yeah, probably wouldn't make them want to be your husband either if you're telling everybody that.
Not a good idea.
Not a good idea.
Okay, one thing that also I think people misunderstand is full custody. We get that question all the time. I want full custody.
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
That's one of those things that we talked about that's like I feel like court TV and things like that, where they're saying, I'm going to sue you for full custody. But in Texas, it's not really a thing at all. There's legal custody, which is conservatorship, and then physical custody, which is possession and access. And those rights, powers, and privileges and duties goes along with legal custody as well. And both parents in Texas are gonna have some of those rights, and probably possession as well, unless they've done something terrible. But in Texas, the law presumes that both parents are gonna have possession of their kid at some point and be able to have some right to raising them under the law.
Yes, and even if they did something terrible, okay, then they have court-ordered time that's supervised.
True, yes.
It's very disappointing to people when they call me and they say, well, I want full custody. And I'm like, that's not a thing.
It's not a thing, no.
Oh, and so the threat that people make is, I'm going to take the children from you. That's a hollow threat. That's a hollow threat, audience. Don't worry. They're not taking your children from you. Okay, another one. Does everyone get a restraining order? A
No.
restraining order for you, a restraining order for you, a restraining
It is not like the Oprah Winfrey of restraining orders. And that is one thing that I've realized since now practicing. We get a lot of calls and people saying, my neighbor or my cousin, somebody like that, is calling people I know and saying X, Y, and Z, terrible things about me. And while we feel for those people, because no one wants anyone disparaging them or defaming them, telling lies about them, under the family code, there's temporary restraining orders, which can happen in a divorce or a suit against the parent-child relationship, to kind of keep those things in place or protect the spouse or protect the child. And then there's protective orders rather than restraining orders. And those things require family violence or a clear and present danger. There have to be actually something that, or someone that's been arrested for stalking or assault or something like that. It can't just be someone that's bothering you even if it's a bad extent, they're saying bad things about you. Under the family code in Texas, that's not enough to get a restraining order.
They might have a right to a restraining order in another area of law.
Yes, this is family code.
It could be business. It could be a criminal act. You know, it might rise to the level of stalking, and then they just call the police.
True.
But we're not handing out restraining orders every day.
And that's what people think. They're like, I should call the family law attorneys because this maybe is a member of your family. Like I had someone call about, they wanted to cut off contact with a family member that had been doing something similar. And while I felt for them, it wasn't anything that under the Texas family code and the family law practice that rose to that level. So definitely maybe under another standard of law, but it's not actually under the family code. Everyone doesn't get a restraining order, even though it seems like on TV everyone has a restraining order.
Oh, one thing about court TV is the people just tell the judge what they want to.
Yes. And that does transfer sometimes to our clients. I've seen it happen. We'll be prepping somebody for trial and we ask our question, and once they answer it, they look at the judge and they're like, and judge, and they start talking. And we have to explain to them that even though I'm sure the judge may want to hear what they want to say, maybe, you can't just start addressing the judge. In court, we're all, including the attorneys, have to follow the rules of evidence. So we ask a question to them on direct, they answer it, and if they go on, the other attorney can object and say non-responsive or that they're telling a story, a narrative, something like that. They have to limit their responses, and the judge will make sure that they limit them. So even though on court TV people have long monologues and they tell the judge all about what happened, it doesn't really go that way in court because of the rules of evidence.
This is not a monologue situation.
It's not. And it's the same for attorneys, because I watch court TV. I'm guilty. I love it. And now I see attorneys telling the person that they're questioning everything that they want to hear for paragraphs and paragraphs, and then saying, isn't that right? But in real life, the person would object and say that they're testifying, and you can't introduce everything through your own mouth, at least not when you're questioning somebody. So it's not that dramatic, at least when you're questioning somebody.
Yes. Also seen on court TV, children testifying.
Yes, which could happen maybe in like a criminal case if it was necessary, but in family law, it does not really happen. It doesn't happen.
In 30 years, I've put one child on the stand.
So
it is very rare. And it was judges don't like it, right? We don't want to put children in the middle. We don't want to traumatize children through the lawsuit. It would have to be an extreme circumstance where the only avenue to get the information, in my situation, it was an older child, teenager. And it was an extreme situation where we were trying to keep someone safe, the younger child safe, and it was our really only way to go about it. But even if you needed to get information from a child, typically it would not be in the form of testimony at trial, right?
yes, would not be in the form of testimony at trial.
Maybe we'd have a child custody evaluation where they would talk to a counselor type person. Maybe the judge would interview them. But on court TV, they just come in the courtroom and testify all the time.
They get on the stand, and that's not actually the case in family law. When a kid is 12 years old, the judge can talk to the child, but that's in chambers. And the judge also will consider what the child, even if the child says one thing, if the judge can tell that the child has been coached one way or told a certain thing or said that someone said something, they'll consider that with everything else and all the rest of the evidence. But yeah, no, normally the child does not come in the courtroom to prove up that dad said something about mom that was mean, the only person you have that witnessed it. Because other thing is, the best interest of the child is the primary consideration of the court, and they don't want to put the child through that in that situation.
Yeah, people say, just go tell the judge what you want. And I've had the privilege or horror, I don't know how you want to look at it, of sitting in on a judicial interview before of children. The judge can include the lawyers and doesn't have to. And I had a judge that wanted us in there, so we were. And what was interesting is they don't say, what do you want to the child? They ask questions like, how are you? What are you doing this summer at home? Oh, is that fun? Well, what's it look like when your mom gets mad at you? What's it look like when your dad gets mad at you? And what are worries that you have? Like, they don't come straight to, what do you want? And part of that is children shouldn't be deciding what, they're not adults, but their worries and concerns are of interest to the court, especially if it's something, like somebody is mistreating them. So sometimes they'll get coached by a parent. Of course, we are instructing the parents, don't say a word to them if they're coming, but sometimes they'll get coached to go tell the judge.
And the judge could normally tell when that's going on, which
Yes.
is probably why they start out with those other questions rather than immediately, who do you want to live with?
Right.
And that's
they
what-
may never ask that question. They may just ask these kind of going around the edges questions. And they will ask, did anybody talk to you about meeting with me today? And what did they say?
Which is a very good idea, because even though, like you said, we ask them not to say anything, sometimes parents can't help themselves because they do want so badly for their kid to be with them. But it doesn't happen how it is on TV, where they say, pick your mom or your dad, and then that's what's going to happen on for the rest of your life. They don't get to choose. Like we said earlier, you have to be, if there's nothing severely wrong, you have to have possession with both of your parents. Even if you don't want to go see one of them because their house is boring, nothing to do, you'll see both of them. But it won't be up to the kid who you're primarily with. The court.
Yes. And that's disappointing to some parents, that the child can't say, oh, I'm not going to go. I don't feel like going this weekend. They have to go.
They have to go.
The way I explain it to my clients is, it's like school. You're not having a conversation with your child every day about, are we going to school?
You're going to school,
Right. And you're going to go see the other parent.
even if it's boring.
Right. And I try to, when I have a client who's like, oh, what am I going to do? They don't want to go. I don't know what to do. I say, well, help them. Like, send stuff over there for them to do so it's not boring. Suggest to the other parent that they get together with their friends while they're over there. Help arm the child with a way to make it more pleasant. And there's some parents who accept that advice. And then there's some parents,
We don't want to do that.
no, they just want to say, he hates it over there.
He doesn't have to go.
I know.
But he does.
Yes. Okay, very common question we get is, how does child support work?
And that's very common. We get a lot of calls of people saying, how does child support work? Are they going to have to pay child support? Because another thing that's widely viewed on court TV when is people being ordered to pay child support. And in Texas, it's based off of the person that's paying, who they call under the law the obligor or the payor, what their income is, their net resources. That's taken into account against guidelines under the family code. And basically it depends on just how much they make against these guidelines, and that's the set number that they will be paying every single month to the person who has primary custody of the child. And it doesn't really matter what that parent who has custody of the child makes. They could make $50 million a year, and the person that's paying child support, it's just about their income in comparison with the child support guidelines under the family code.
Yeah, our calculation is very simple, which simple has a value, but it does not always turn out completely fair because there isn't a consideration of what the other person earns. In California, for example, they do consider that. It's a much more complicated math equation there, and they consider what both people make. Do people have to do what the family code says as far as child support?
No, that's the good thing about, like we said earlier, yay, mediation. You can go to mediation and agree to something else, agree to a different payment schedule each month or amount and how that will work. And you can take advice from other states and say, hey, this is what California does. We could do it this way. And that helps. That way both sides can work together to come to a different agreement that takes into account the other spouse's income. And you can reach those agreements for that. And that's how child support will be paid going forward.
It's one reason I love collaborative and collaborative approach is the collaborative approach under the family code. We definitely take a more creative approach and not just what's the math on the guidelines. But if nobody agrees, that's how it goes, right? Somebody can insist on, I want guideline child support, or I only want to pay guideline child support. And it's very simple. The family code changes. Every 2 years, the legislature meets and the family code could change. So it could change, and we have a cap. So they only apply the formula to certain number. So I would say roughly the cap is probably 140 gross right now, 140,000. So if you make 140,000 or 140 million a year, your child support, if it's straight guidelines, is the same number. Now that is shocking to people.
That's very shocking to people.
When they have an earner that's more in the millions, they're disappointed. They're like, what? Because the number I'm going to tell them is not high compared to what they're used to. It's not a lifestyle consideration.
And that's what a lot of people think, is that it's going to take into the account what we've done our entire lives since we've been married together and the lives that our children have become accustomed to. But it's really a set amount. It does take into consideration other things, like if the number of children, if they have other children, it can be, that's a factor that is considered, how many kids there are in the home, and if they're paying child support to somebody else. But that normally, that will lower it, not increase it. So it's helpful to the person that's paying, but not, again, not the person that's receiving the money for child support.
Really, I think over all my years of doing this, one of the things I've had to say that just sounds almost cruel sometimes is you have to get a job. When people come in and they've been a stay-at-home parent, unless they are ridiculously wealthy, they're going to have to go get a job. And that's hard news for someone to receive. And part of that is because of our pathetic spousal support alimony laws. Another popular
misconception and question is that how much can I get in alimony, and another thing that I didn't know until I went to law school and took family law classes and worked for y'all is that in Texas, technically alimony doesn't exist. Alimony is not a thing. We have a thing called spousal maintenance, or when it's during the divorce, or it's temporary spousal support. So, but a lot of the time the judge will only give you that for a couple of months, or like while you get back on your feet after the divorce has ended. And it's a really hard, what they call a negative presumption, that it's presumed that you won't be getting it. You have to show that you are eligible for it, and then after that, how much you can get. And it a lot of the times doesn't last that long. So
yes,
it
is not going to be lifetime support.
No.
I have never seen that. So that is very disappointing. And if somebody, nobody tells you, it's not like you get a street sign as you go into marriage. Hey, you should work. That's what I wish they would tell people.
Because later it might hurt you.
Yes, because if you support the other person's career and you then spend most of the money that is earned, you're kind of in a bad situation starting, over. And if you knew that, people aren't entering into that knowingly, right? They aren't, one, they don't think they're going to divorce, and two, they don't know they're really disadvantaging themselves by not pursuing their own career. And none of this is about my opinions about child rearing. I can see why some people make the decision as a family for one of the parents to raise the kids more, to not work. I think that's great for kids. But there maybe needs to be a prenup or a postnup.
And that's why I think a lot of people are doing that now, is people are suggesting it for that reason. And you're right, a lot of the time it's even a joint decision. Like, I'm going to work and you stay home with the kids. And it is something that the court will take into consideration when you are getting divorced. Like, you were the primary caregiver, you supported them throughout the time of getting their career. But after the fact, it's still going to come down to probably you having to get a job, which, for lack of a better word, sucks. Like, you felt,
Yeah.
but it's very true, and a lot of people don't know that
Yes.
that can be the outcome.
And it's not like I think a lot of people are happy to work. It's just that if they don't get into the workforce until they're in their 40s or 50s.
It's scary.
Yes, and how do they build the career? They don't have the time. They will never catch up to that other person.
Never.
So that's the challenge. And even if, like you said, it's taken into account and they get a little bit more of the community estate, it's not enough. I mean, usually, because they spent a lot of money. Americans like to spend money.
They do.
Save some of those dollars. Okay. Another topic. People are very disappointed when they find out that the police do not enforce everything.
Yes, and I've also gotten a couple of those calls since I've started working. And another thing that I learned throughout working and with y'all is that, like, for example, if you have someone who has they've taken someone to court and said they haven't paid my child support, or they haven't reimbursed me for these medical expenses that they were ordered to pay as child support, and the court agrees and they said they didn't pay them, and at the end they get a judgment against them, which is just basically a piece of paper that says you are owed this much money from that person because they failed to pay it. But sadly, in a sense, it isn't, but it kind of is just a piece of paper. People think, I got someone the other day that said, can you take the judgment and give it to the police and they'll go get him because he hasn't paid it yet? And it's sad to say, but no, I can't do that. What you can do is you can take that judgment and you can use it as a lien on people's assets or property or things like that to hopefully get paid. But just because the court says that they failed to pay what they were ordered to pay, it doesn't mean that the police will go straight out and take that judgment and go arrest them because they failed to pay it. And a lot of people think that.
Yeah, I always think of it as there's no enforcement fairy out there. So the client's going to have to take more steps. I mean, the good news about child support is it's the most enforceable. So if they take more steps, meaning they have to probably file with the Attorney General again or hire a lawyer, the Attorney General will do it for free, pro tip, but they take forever. So, because they do it for free for everyone. So the judge will eventually put them in jail if they don't pay. So child support's the easiest thing to enforce. But there's a lot of things judges order that aren't child support, right? Pay this credit card as part of the divorce, or give us your new address when you move. And people just don't do it. They don't want to. They aren't even aware it's in their order. They don't do it. And people say, well, he violated that order. Like, why don't they do something? Like, who are they? So the way to do something is to file a motion. And nobody, the courts don't have time to hear your complaint about, and you're going to pay more for a lawyer than it's going to cost you to get him to pay the $300 credit card. Mm-hmm. So that's the problem, is it's not easy to enforce. So the best thing to do is, one, get a deal where there's going to be less of that, right? Like, make part of the mediated settlement agreement. Everybody pays the debts in their own name and try to offset money another way. Or self-help, call them and say, what's your new address? Because the police, that's not part of their job. They're there to fight crime.
Yes, exactly. And like you said earlier, child support is one of the most enforceable, but another thing that people don't know about it is, in order to enforce it, you have to get what's called personal service on the person. Mm-hmm. That's failed to pay. And a lot of times, it's sad to say, but the people that aren't paying for these things sometimes are hiding and don't want to be found anywhere. And so to be able to take them to jail, they have to have personal service and be served in person. So it can become frustrated. And like you said, you might end up paying more to try and find them than they owe you.
Yes. Neali, it's been so great to have you here today. And those are some great examples of things people are confused about because of the value of court TV. I'm glad we cleared it up, and we're available to you at Duffee Eitzen to answer all your questions. And we'd love to hear from you here at the Melinda Eitzen Show. So if you have questions, we'd love to hear from you. Submit them and we'll answer them on another episode. And that is our show today. Thank you for watching the Melinda Eitzen Show.